it through. Got it. And so in thinking it through, I thought, let's explore all options, including jobs in business. Procter & Gamble had a program then, I think they still have, where they hire young people to manage, it's called brand management. And I had a girlfriend at the time who said, "Oh, great, you're going to be Mr. Jiffy Peanut Butter." I did the interviews, but never became Mr. Jiffy Peanut Butter, happily. And so in this search, I went down to the Washington Post. At the time, no security, and walked in and found the Metropolitan editor named Harry Rosenfeld, said, "I'd like to work here." And he said, "What experience do you have?" I said, "None." And he's got out stacks of applications from people who'd been in journalism for 10, 15, 20 years, and asked the very interesting question, "Why you?" And I did not have a good answer other than to say I would like to try. So pardon? Go ahead.
No, we didn't see them.
This is a long monologue. I'm sorry. So I had a 2-week tryout, wrote a dozen stories, none of which were published. Harry Rosenfeld and his deputy called me in and said, "Okay, you don't know what you're doing. Good luck in life." And I said, "Thank you." And I remember vividly Harry saying, "Well, why are you thanking me? You failed." And I said, "Yes, but I learned the important thing, which was, I love this work. This is what I want to do." I then got a job at a weekly paper, Montgomery County Sentinel, for a year, and the Post hired me full-time, simply, I think, because I had done some stories that they wished they had.
Yeah, you scooped the Post. That's great.
So there's an accidental quality to trying to find out what you want to do, which is coupled, of course, with the issue of who you want to be. And I've realized on the lawyer track, it's something that I assumed, my father assumed, others, friends assumed, and don't let somebody else decide what you want to do. Make sure you weigh it, debate it with yourself, and consider some alternatives. I don't know whether the position Mr. Jiffy Peanut Butter is still available, but you learn something in those interviews. You learn something just by, I remember I asked for an application from the CIA. I got it. I never filled it out, thank God. But again, cover the bases.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's a great story. I'll always think of you as Mr. Jiffy Peanut Butter from now on.
Please do.
Yes. Okay, so we're gonna start with Lisa. And
Hi.
Speak up, everybody.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Pardon?
Very nice to meet you. Over video. So I was wondering how you approach cultivating sources according to their status. How do you approach like interviewing the president versus a clerk at an agency? Would you go off the record with a very like high official, or like the president? Would you go off the record with the president versus a clerk?
No, I don't. I've found in interviewing sitting presidents, I've been rigorous on this. It's always on the record with them. I don't think a sitting president should be allowed to speak off the record in any form. And I make that clear most recently with Donald Trump and the book we put out of the Trump tapes. Now, journalism, like any other work, you accumulate habits, sometimes good, sometimes bad. When I started working at the Post, I learned something. I'd be interested whether Dana agrees with this, that if you get a day story or you're assigned a day story, you can do a perfectly respectable story most times by talking to 2 or 3 people. But it's also possible, if you really want to dig into the issue, and quite frankly, I think that's any story, you can talk to 16 people in a single day. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And so if your habit is to talk to 2 or 3 people, that's fine. If it's to talk to 16 or 12 or as many as you can, you open the lens, and it may not immediately inform your story, but it will tell you there are other paths to other stories that are related. You will see a much bigger world when you talk to 16 people versus just 2 or 3. Now, I'll tell you an important story. It is my first months at the Post. The Post was running stories about restaurant inspections in the District of Columbia that showed really not just unsanitary, but hazardous conditions in many big name restaurants in Washington. Then I got assigned to do one of these. I went over to the DC Health Department and asked, who oversees these records? No other journalist had been there. It was not a long cab ride. And I met the man who actually put these reports out. And he said, I'll give you a heads up. I'll send them to you early, and developed a personal relationship with that source. And so one morning he called me and said, we have a inspection report, a sanitation report on the Mayflower coffee shop. And it is the worst score that we have ever given in the history of health sanitation inspections in DC. So, and said, great, I'll come over and get it. So I got it, and it said that exactly that. Because we have eaten, or we will eat again, I'm not going to tell you the details that were in the report. The Mayflower coffee shop was just outrageously unsanitary. And so I showed it to the city editor, Barry Sussman. Did you ever know Barry, Dana?
Yeah, he was there just a little while before when I first came.
Yeah, and showed him this. He said, wow, that's an important story. You have the document, write it up now. We like early copy. Remember that?
Yeah.
They always want early. So I did a draft of the story, and I showed it to him that the coffee shop in the Mayflower Hotel had these awful conditions. And then he said to me, "Have you been there?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, why don't you get off your fat ass and go there? It's 3 blocks away." And I remember thinking, picky, okay, yes, sir, I'll go. Oh, so I go over to the Mayflower Hotel and said, "Walk in, where's the coffee shop?" And they said, "We don't have one. We have a Jean Pierre, or whatever fancy restaurant. We have a buffet, no coffee shop." And kind of looking around, wait a minute. So I looked at the document that the source at the health department had given me, and it said Mayflower Coffee Shop, and it gave a different address. And I went to that address, which was the Statler Hilton Hotel, half a block from the Washington Post. And the Mayflower now, God knows I never learned why they called it the Mayflower Coffee Shop in the Statler Hilton, but they did. And when I went there, they had a big sign, "Closed for repair." I found the manager and he said, "Yeah, we had a bad inspection day and we're fixing things now," and so forth. So I then went back to the city editor and I said, "Can you give me my copy? Draft. There are a few little changes I'd like to make." Now, that could have been published. And I think I would have been lucky to be working at the Mayflower Coffee Shop at the Statler Hilton. And so what's the lesson there is, use all the information you have. And right on that document was an address. And it was accurate, but it was the Statler Hilton Hotel, not the Mayflower Hotel. Now, what's the lesson about that? Because it's coupled very much with the cultivation of sources, that sources can be great, or you can have a relationship of trust, but they can unintentionally mislead you, or you can mislead yourself, as I did in this case. So what, one of you, let me ask, what's the lesson from that?
What's the lesson from that?
Someone raise their hand. Yes, go ahead.
Verifying the information that you get from your sources.
Right? What else?
Right, guys.
Intuition can only get you so far. You think it's one place, it's actually another place.
Right. But it wasn't intuition, it was just sloppiness on my part. But the lesson there is, go to the scene. When I have do books on presidents, on national security issues, I get someone to take me to the Situation Room in the White House, which is a SCIF, secured, compartmented information facility. And they're not supposed to bring somebody there who doesn't have clearance, but I say, I want to see it, and when it's not in use. And so just the going to that scene, it gives you the dimension of the room, where the president sits, where other people sit, the backbenchers, there's a video screen. Now that is information I think I never used directly, but when I got people to talk about what took place at those meetings, what was in the notes and the documents, in my head, I could go there. Yes, when the president speaks, when the vice president speaks, makes it much more real. So in writing about Afghanistan, the war in Afghanistan, I went there and just in 4 or 5 days, learned so much about what it feels like, what the Marines who were there, high level people, low level people, and it's the germ of that for me is to go to the scene, wherever it might be. Dana, were you ever able to go to one of the secret prisons that the CIA had?
It was after they knew that I was writing the story, so they already had closed it down, but just going there and looking at the barbed wire and the setup, yeah, it was very, very helpful.
Yeah, and it it authenticates it also, not only physically, but emotionally.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Sarah?
Hello, I'm Sarah. My question is about making sources feel comfortable when you're talking to them. So in an interview you did discussing your book, The Commanders, you said so much of approaching sources and talking to them is finding out how to make them comfortable. You said some prefer phone calls, other an intimate dinner or lunch, and like what works with one source isn't the same for another. So how do you go about developing these relationships with sources and finding out the best ways to get them to talk? And does it take meeting with them more than one time to figure out the best way to get information from them?
That's a good question, and you often have to start with the phone and move to in-person meetings, but then that can, that's not always a direct route. The last book that I did on Trump, Peril, with Robert Costa, who's now at CBS, was at the Post, one of the terrific reporters of all time. We developed, Claire can attest to this, we did interviews with everyone. Trump and Biden would not talk to us, but we did these interviews on deep background, meaning we're going to use the information, but not say where it came from, taped it with the people's knowledge. And it was 6,000 pages of transcript that we had of the main players, information, documents, contemporaneous notes, and that was the basis of that book, which Costa and I and Claire did the first draft, reported and wrote in 5 months.
What's your first approach with people in the bureaucracy who are not important, well-known names? How do you first approach them?
Yes, you need to get lists. In Watergate, Carl Bernstein and Carl got a list of all the people who worked at the President's Re-election Committee in 1972. Carl trained me, and you're not going to go to the homes or office, you're not going to go to the offices of these people. We're going to go to their homes and knock on the door, not call ahead. And so lists of names, some things I'm working on now. I have pages of these are the people I want to talk to. This is how to extend the circle of people who may have knowledge about something that I am working on.
Well, then what's the first thing you say to them when you meet them?
Hello. And then I think the four most potent words in journalism is to say to people hello. And then the 4 words are, I need your help. and don't come there arrogantly at all. But the fact is, you do need their help. And I would say that to presidents, say that to CIA directors, say that to secretaries of defense, and people you've never heard of. And this is, the reporting has to be from the bottom up to the top. It was about 4 days after 9/11, the terrorist attacks of September 2001. I remember going to interview Robert Mueller, who was then the FBI director, just got the job a few days after the terrorist attacks. And one of the things he said, and I wish I'd asked more about it, he said, when we at the FBI are investigating a crime, agents are trained to go to the people who have day-to-day responsibility for what we are investigating. And that means the bottom, or just, somebody who actually is involved and has specific knowledge of events and actions and decisions. You start there. And that's exactly what a reporter does, unless, the president calls you up and says, I'd like to talk to you, and things like that sometimes happen. Unfortunately, not that often.
Hunter?
Yeah, and so I was reading the transcript from one of your interviews with Donald Trump.
Yes.
And he's kind of all over the road. He's a very evasive talker, and he's kind of like rambling down his own path. How do you keep him on target, and how do you get the information that you want to get out of those conversations where people are maybe?
Yes, that's a great question. Do you remember which transcript what you were looking at?
Yeah, I was looking at it was the one where you were asking about when he decided to run for president.
Yes, that's the first interview that Costa and I did in 2016 when he was, and what we wanted to do is get him to look inside. How did you decide that? And he would talk about, I remember going down the escalator, and this is his famous description. And we pointed out that's the action. How did you get to the point of deciding to do it? Other words, and the question is kind of a stock question, is where does the movie start? And particularly with somebody like Trump, who always thinks of himself as being in a movie, his movie, that he's the star and the director and the producer, we got an answer, which was revealing and told us kind of how his mind worked, and led to at one point the question, because we were asking Trump, now remember, he's on the verge of getting the Republican nomination. Bob Costa rightly said he didn't think people were taking Trump seriously enough, and in not taking him seriously enough, people were not asking the questions about being president and about power. And so in that interview in 2016, we asked him, what is power for a president? And this is when he said, well, real power is, I don't like to say it, but real power is fear. And that's the title of my first Trump book. And of course, it tells you how he operates. Fear is a tool. So I think if you read the whole transcript of that, you see Trump was kind of realized we were asking questions that no one else was asking. And I think that's one of the problems of journalism. It's kind of, give me the soundbite, give me the headline, give me something I can tweet. And Trump, quite frankly, I think was very pleased to see reporters come in and ask the large questions about the presidency, about power, about who you get advice from, etc.
Yeah. Corinne?
So for Trump and other politicians and other officials who have shown a tendency to
Pardon?
can you hear me?
You're not getting your voice clearly. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
I think so.
So for Trump and other elected officials and those who are in government, shown a tendency to talk to reporters who work for media outlets that portray the perspectives that they have. Is there a certain way that you go about getting them to speak to you versus other?
Well, you mean do the sources respect the reporter? Yeah, I think sometimes, sometimes not. But there is a myth about that, sometimes people will think, oh, they have to talk to me when I'm working on something. And that's in fact not the case. Sometimes people, just don't want to talk, and this is something that's important. Dana, you ever use tape recorders in doing your interviews?
Seldom. I probably should do it more. How about you?
And I've learned, and this is a big surprise, you would think people in these high positions would look at the tape recorder as if it's kryptonite or poison. And oddly enough, everyone relaxes. You say, I'm going to record this. I'm going to use everything. I'm not going to say where it came from. And I think at all levels, all kinds of personalities look at this and say, well, at least this will give me pretty good assurance that the reporter will get it right. And the suspicion, and again, all the environment that we're working in right now in 2023 is suspicion and distrust of our business, and anything that can be done to build trust is important, I think.
Yeah. Okay, Grace?
Hi, I'm Grace. When you're working to gain the trust of your sources, what's your policy on objectivity, and how important is staying neutral when you become closely involved with sources or have some kind of personal connection to the topics that you're covering?
I'm not quite sure the question.
I guess, do you think that objectivity is possible, or I guess, how do you approach that?
Each one's different. You need to understand the human dimension. Sometimes you will get to know people quite well and become friends with them to a certain degree, but as a reporter, you have to make it clear that's your job. And I've had a number of sources I've used over the years and had in stories or books some negative material about the source, and they kind of thought the deal was I would protect them. And that is the last thing you can do. And you need to make it clear, I'm not here as just a casual luncheon companion, but I am here as a reporter. And that's why when you record, it helps immensely because it says, look, I want to get this right. The theme here in this, if you write any of this down, and I'm not hypothesizing that it's useful, you need to treat people, you need to take them as seriously as they take themselves. And particularly people in Washington take themselves seriously. And if you, there've been a number of times I've gone to interview somebody, and because I did background work, it was their birthday. And so you come in and you say, happy birthday. Now, what does that tell them? That, you're doing some research, or you wrote this in this article even 10 years earlier. In other words, you want to treat people seriously. You can't come in and kind of say, hey, what do you do? Who are you? I had people over many decades come and interview me. And I've had some of the most prominent TV news people come interview me about stories or presidents or the CIA or the Supreme Court, and literally sit in my living room and I say, when I was in the Navy, and they say, you were in the Navy? Well, I was in the Navy for 5 years. That's a long time. It doesn't, and you can't have that experience and it not inform you about many issues, including war. But the most rudimentary work sometimes is not done. You've got to really make it, not to kind of draw it on the blackboard and wave it around. I've done my research, but put it in the context of the interview.
Okay, we have Destiny.
Hi, I'm Destiny. So how do you go about asking your sources questions that you know they're not gonna like? Like a question about something that they did that they're gonna get really defensive about?
That they're not going to answer?
Yeah, like.
No, see, I think the big mistake some people make is they assume that people will not answer questions. And I think in the flow of, I've done interviews with other reporters going way back. And I remember talking with this reporter, a source, a person who had access to lots of secrets. And the other reporter said, I know you can't answer this because it's classified.
Oh, God.
Oh, God. I almost wanted to strangle him. You are not, I mean, first of all, if you're reporting on national security, you are going to be dealing with classified information one way or another. And you don't want to, you want people to talk to you. I have not too long ago, before one of my books came out, went to see the CIA director to say, these are the 10 things that might give you gas pains. I'm ending my research and things you're going to be on. We went through, and I wasn't happy, but he didn't strike, didn't call the security to arrest me because I had knowledge. But the 10th question I asked, he said, okay, if you publish that, that will start a war. And I remember thinking, no, that's kind of hyped up. That really start a war? Yes, start a war. And he had his chief of staff take me afterwards and into a room, and I assumed there were microphones and video cameras, and said, okay, I mean, this is very unusual moment, said, if you don't publish that, we'll give you something that's better. Ever have that happen, Dana?
Yeah, yeah,
You have?
yeah.
What'd you do?
Well, if someone said to me it would start a war, I would take it very, very seriously, especially if they didn't object to the first 9 things. And how crucial is it to your book to put that in there? And I guess I would consult with other people.
You never consult with?
No, I would.
Oh, okay. Yes. And I said, okay, did some work. That's a little bit of a jolt when the CIA director says, if you publish that, it will start a war, not maybe, and offers to trade information. I said with his chief of staff, absolutely, I don't trade. You can't trade. I will examine the issue on its merits and decide whether to publish or not. I'll let you know. I did, and decided to not use that particular piece of information, which was very good, very solid, because essentially the CIA director had confirmed it. And on its merits, I did not publish it. But I also, you develop these relationships with some people, and it was just kind of start a war, that's as big as it gets. And I'm glad I didn't publish it. It wasn't something that was going to, it was a sources and method issue for the CIA. And
Can I follow up with Destiny's question? It's also,
I was gonna.
okay, go ahead.
I guess my question was more, less like asking about confidential information and more asking about something that maybe they wouldn't want to admit to. For example, we're gonna be talking to lobbyists. And if I was interviewing a lobbyist that's lobbying for a corporation that has done something definitively wrong, how should I go about sort of bringing that subject up to the lobbyist without making them clam up and back off quickly?
well, I think you need to ask about that, maybe at the end of the interview.
Yeah.
You want to prepare your questions and sequence them in a logical way. And if you're going to ask a difficult question, that's the job of a journalist, and you can do it in a important way. When after Nixon resigned in 1974, Katharine Graham, who was the publisher, owner of the Washington Post, wrote Carl Bernstein and myself a letter on yellow legal stationery. And it said, "Dear Carl and Bob, now you've done some of the stories. Nixon resigned, quote, don't start thinking too highly of yourselves." And He said, let me give you some advice. He said, the advice is beware the demon pomposity. Beware the demon pomposity. Really important advice for journalists, quite frankly, for everyone. But there's pomposity in our business, particularly on television. People speaking on television, saying more than they would ever write for their newspaper or say in a set piece. But things get stretched, overstated, or stated in a way on network, on cable news network particularly, that wouldn't, it just gets out of hand. And if you watch, how many of you watch cable news?
Yeah.
See, that's why one of you that doesn't watch cable news, tell me why you don't.
Because, well,
It feels like entertainment and not.
Say
it
that
feels-
again.
It feels like
What?
entertainment and not information.
What? Oh, yeah, oh, that it's entertainment. You don't, yeah, it's entertainment that's not very entertaining in my view. And I do cable news because it's a way of, if you've done a book or story, of getting it out, getting discussion about it, agreement or disagreement. But we've got a screwed up communication system in this country, and it's driven by the internet, impatient speed, give it to me. People literally saying, reduce the story or the issue to a phrase. And as we all know, lots of issues can't be reduced to a phrase. And this whole infection creates a mindset of do it quick, simplify it, don't spend time. And I think that almost any good work in journalism comes from spending time.
so Bob, could you give us an example of what you would exactly say to somebody, or in what tone of voice, if you're going to ask a question about something that they did that wasn't good, that was bad, and you knew that they were going to react maybe hostilely? Would you try to say that before? I know you're not going to like this question, or how would you frame that question?
You would be direct about it and not try to dress it up as something that it is not. But one of the discoveries, you know this better than anyone, is people will often make admissions against interest. Just follow, oh yeah, by the way, then we created this phony bank account. Happens time and time again, particularly if you've done long interviews. I think it's just like any human interaction. It may go this way or that way, and you can't control it. The key is time. Dana, you remember David Broder,
Sure.
who was the chief political reporter at the Post, a great reporter. I worked with him a couple of times on things, and he literally would have interviews, one at 10 in the morning, one at 11, one at 1, one at 2. And so and then we were taping these interviews with the people. I remember he was talking to the governor of California, important person, to say the least. And David, the interview is going on for an excellent interview for about 45 or 50 minutes. And David says, "Oh, I'm sorry, Governor, I've got to go. I have an interview with the deputy chief of the House majority or minority." And I remember listening to that and just saying, you have closed the door by scheduling. And so what you schedule things, it's open-ended. As far as I'm concerned, Claire knows, unfortunately, has had to deal with these interviews that go on for hours and hours. And closing the door is a mistake on any story, any issue, frankly. Now, that doesn't mean you do a 4-hour interview all the time. But again, it's expanding the lens. I remember it was, I think 1976, I was giving a talk at Brookings, one of the think tanks here in Washington. And after it, a man came up to me and said, "Do you have time to have coffee?" And I said, "Oh, I'm busy. I've got a schedule. I'm sorry." And then I asked what I should have asked first. I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Well, I'm in charge of the Intelligence Oversight Board for President Ford in the White House." I remember embarrassingly saying, "Gee, it turns out I do have time for coffee." Now, Bob Caro, one of the great book writers, Lyndon Johnson series, has a show at I think is it the New York Library? I think it's called Turn Every Page. And I know Caro pretty well, and he is exactly right. Turn every page. For a reporter, knock on every door. Make every phone call. Don't close yourself off. Don't limit what the story might be. Now, this particular person who stopped me, we did go have coffee. He had one of the most sensitive positions in the White House, and he was willing, as long as he was not identified directly or indirectly, gave me everything. I remember the first story I got from him was how Henry Kissinger, as national security advisor for Ford at that time, had ordered a wiretap on negotiations between the U.S. And Micronesians, the Pacific island. These people are literally living a tribal culture. And he says, "Oh no, we're in a negotiation with them, Kissinger. We've got to know what these tribal people are doing." And I remember running the story, lead story in the paper, Kissinger orders, and it was, people didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Same with Kissinger, very upset. Why would you run that story? We're in a negotiation. Well, some negotiations are so where the United States is not the underdog, but the other party is the underdog, and it's news to explain this. So When somebody asks you to have coffee or calls, Claire knows this well, people will call or email, and you never shut it down. You sometimes Claire will call, find out what it is. Somebody will say, oh, I've got a story bigger than Watergate. And what the story is that this person's father's Social Security check was late 2 months in a row. Somewhat short of another Watergate, but personally saw this as a big, big story.
That sounds very familiar. Okay, how about John Mariel?
Hi, my name is John Ariel. I wanted to ask, what should we do if we have the misfortune of working with a public official who has media training? And they're wise to all these methods that we're trying to use.
To work with someone who has media training.
Media training. Yes. You mean, in other words, how to give an interview and not say anything important. That's just another obstacle. And you can recognize it and see it. Often somebody like that, you'll interview in their office in the government, and you can then give me your phone number and then call them at night, and they may give you a better interview, better information, or be willing to meet with you outside the Pentagon, or depending where they work. Again, don't close off. When Scott Armstrong and I did a book called The Brethren about the Supreme Court, we got 5 sitting justices to talk to us and help us significantly, 140 law clerks to help us. We had the raw documentation and memos and secret case histories, only because we just turn every page, make every phone call. And because he's deceased, I'll say this, one of the justices who helped us was Justice White. Now, you talk to clerks for White and they say, White will never talk, never talk. I went in there in his office and said, I want to ask about your point of view and your reaction to a series of issues. He gave a kind of, really, it was a roadmap for him on the major issues, the Nixon tapes case, abortion, death penalty, and so forth, in maybe an hour-and-a-half interview. I have showed that to some of White's, he's now deceased, clerks and friends, and they looked at it and said, my God, he told us these stories in confidence. That there's so much information there. And so when somebody says, oh, so-and-so will never talk, you'll never find out what goes on in the CIA. You'll never find out what goes on in the Pentagon or the White House. Not so. Not so.
Yeah. Molly.
Hi, so we're taught to avoid anonymous sources because there's no name, so there's no credibility or accountability for the source. But realistically, there are times when you have to make a judgment call to include an anonymous source, which you've famously done. So can you walk us through how you evaluate whether or not it's worth it to include an anonymous source?
Well, but give me an example of an anonymous source.
Someone who doesn't want their name connected.
Okay. but do they give you information? If you look at the books I've done, 21 books, the 22nd is really the Trump audio tapes. You will see it tells specific people at specific times doing or saying what happened. They are not anonymous. I'd say, look, going to use this information, could have come from their aide, their chief of staff, their whatever, and they feel protected, even though, I mean, take the last book that Costa and I did. It opens on a specific day, 3 days after the insurrection on the Capitol. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, has a discussion with the head of the Chinese military, and the head of the Chinese military, General Lee, says, what's happening in the United States is a coming apart. And Milley says, oh no, democracy is sometimes messy. Just at that moment, Milley gets a call from Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. Thanks to Costa's great reporting, we got a transcript of that phone call in which Nancy Pelosi says to Milley, how can we be assured that President Trump will not use nuclear weapons? And she says, I mean, look at the beginning of the book. She says, he's crazy. Trump's crazy. You know it. And Milley says, yes, I agree with everything you're saying. And he's trying to calm her down. And then he realizes in a very important way what he calls the absolute darkest theoretical, what is it? The absolute darkest moment of theoretical possibility. The darkest moment of theoretical possibility that maybe he can't assure the Speaker of the House that Trump's not going to set off nuclear weapons because he, as commander-in-chief, has sole authority to make that decision. And so Milley mulls this over, talks to his staff. The dialogue is in here, and you see that Milley calls in the one-star, either one-star admiral or Army, Air Force, Marine general into his office, who are the watch officers in the National Military Command Center. And he says to them, this is one of the most dramatic moments I've ever reported on. And then Milley says, all right, the president can set off nuclear weapons, but we have a procedure that is not in law, but it is in the habit of the president will consult the chairman, who's the senior military advisor to the president, before making a decision. And Milley goes around the room and says, I want each of you to make an oath that you understand, and if we get to this moment, you will include me in the decision before anything happens. And goes around the room. Got it? Yes, sir. Got it? Yes, sir. Got it? Yes, sir. Got it? Yes, sir. And anyway, Costa did get a transcript of part of that, but we did lots of reporting, and it's very clear this is one of these pivot points in history where you have the Speaker of the House and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs worrying that Trump might start a war out of anger or out of whatever it was. Now, people have some people have criticized Milley, saying, oh, no, he was taking power from the president. He was not. President has that authority, but you can have a procedure that says, and this happened in 1974 when Nixon was president, and people like Nixon's son-in-law, Eddie Cox, was going to people saying, we're worried that the president is President Nixon going to take his own life. And he's not stable. He's running around the White House at night, talking to the pictures on the wall. Hey, Abe, extraordinary moment. And Jim Schlesinger, who was the Secretary of Defense, told everyone, said, do not take orders from Nixon without involving me in that process. A duplicate of what happened with Trump almost 50 years later.
Amazing, amazing. Fatima?
Hi, my name is Fatima. You have written several books on US presidents, including Fear about Trump administration. I wonder, how did you approach the research for this type of projects?
How you approach research for books like Fear?
Oh, how do I approach research like the first Trump book, Fear? Let me, in this, be as thorough as possible. I'll tell you the origin of that in the most serious way. I got a call from one of the well-known public relations people in Washington. You know about those people, Dana?
Yes.
They call you and they'll say, I want to, they have something to sell. This person said, I've got an official in the government who wants to talk to you that you should meet. And I thought, why am I going to do this? But turn every page. So invited the PR person and I think her client, really, to dinner with my wife, Elsa. And we had a long talk. And there was some useful information there. And I realized the government official could be helpful. And so later on, I made contact with that person and said, who should I talk to about what's going on in the Trump White House? This person gave me the cell phone numbers of two people who were incredible. And they turned out to be two of the main sources of what's in the book, including the details about how officials in the Trump White House literally stole documents off Trump's desk in the White House because Trump had ordered a letter written or an order issued that these officials, the people who worked for Trump, decided was unwise. And Trump ordered a letter drafted to the president of South Korea abolishing the trade agreement that the United States and South Korea had key in economic and diplomatic policy. And the chief economic advisor in the Trump White House, Gary Cohn, stole it off Trump's desk. So he wouldn't sign it because he knew it would be a disaster. Now, I had a reporter the other day, Jonathan Carl from ABC, who's known Trump forever, and he said he read the book and he saw the opening chapter about this document being stolen, and then I was able to get a copy of it. So right on the page is the document that was stolen and unsigned. Jonathan Carl said, he said, I remember reading the book and, you know, it's an incident. And then you go to that page and there it is, the actual document, and it's in a file folder that said save. I don't think it was saved for me, but we got it. So is there any question that happened? No, zero. Now, if you can get to that point, turn every page.
Yeah.
Somebody, even a well-known public relations person wants to come and bring somebody from the government, you do it.
Yeah. Jackie.
Hi, my name is Jackie. Something that struck me while I was reading through the Trump tapes was that you included a conversation between you and your wife about one of the conversations you and Trump had. It seemed like a kind of an insignificant conversation at first, but it proved to illustrate what was going on at the time. So my question is, how do you go off the beaten path, find those sources, those conversations and those quotes that might seem inconsequential at first and help them to build a bigger picture?
Well, in that case, what happened, and it's critical to understanding Trump and the 8 hours of interviews I did with him. The coronavirus is just taking hold. First, he denied to me and said, oh, it's going to go away, don't worry. And then there is a very interesting sequence here, but I think it was March 13th, 2020. Again, I'm sorry to use dates, but chronology is critical to describing, you know, events occur in chronological order, right? We still haven't found somebody who can, but when you're reporting, you don't learn things as they happen. You often learn months or years later. So what happened, I was talking to Dr. Fauci and Dr. Redfield, who headed the CDC, about the virus. And they told me that they were meeting with Trump regularly, but Trump would not listen, would not pay attention, and Trump needed to mobilize the country in a serious way to deal with what turned out to be a gigantic issue, a pandemic. I think now 1.1 million people in this country died from coronavirus. And so I got all this information from the doctors. And so at one point in March, I'm talking to Trump and I said, how about the virus? And, oh, you know, it's going to go away. And I said, now, wait a minute, that doctors are saying that you need to do a World War II mobilization of the country. You need to come up with definitions like who is an essential worker. You need to coordinate the intel. There were about 15 things. And I went through them with Trump, and because he's not listening to the doctors, but I had talked to them and had a whole matrix of what could be done. I presented it to Trump, and first he didn't seem to be listening. Then he said, did you write those down? I said, yes, and read them again. And I thought he was going to do something. Now, at the end, my wife, Elsa Walsh, who worked for the Washington Post, was a staff writer for the New Yorker along for many years, participated in these interviews with Trump many times. And Trump was told this, I introduced Elsa to him over the phone. He kept saying, oh, you got to come visit me anyway. So I went through these 15 things in detail and hung up with Trump. And Elsa said to me, and this was on the tape, she said, you're shouting at him. You're telling him what to do. That is not your job. Your job is to get information. And I said, but it is a different time now. And I kind of a little family discussion, but in doing the Trump tapes, I thought I can't cut that out because she was being appropriately journalistic, but I had information that I wanted to present, and we now know, or we soon later learned, that Trump's negligence handling the pandemic is probably the worst thing he did, because he knew, turns out from reporting that I did months later, that he got this warning on January 28th from his national security team, that the virus is, as Robert O'Brien said to Trump, said, Mr. President, this virus is coming. It is going to be the biggest national security threat to your presidency. I've dealt with and reported on 16 national security advisors to presidents going back to Kissinger, and never heard as stark a warning to a president as that. And so I felt it was a time to quite openly cross the line. Dana, what do you think? What would you have done?
I'm not sure, but I think it's compelling what you did do and what Elsa responded. It's real.
Yeah.
It's real. So
I agree.
Yeah, 2 more students, and then I'll open it up. Esther?
Hi, I'm Esther. Going back a bit to kind of research and methodology. When you're a student or you're someone not as experienced and you don't receive calls about tips for stories, at what point during your researching and digging do you find an aha moment, or is it more, you'd have to flesh out a story idea and talk to a couple people before you truly decide this story has to and frankly deserves to be written?
I think the idea, the concept is most of the time to deal with decision making by presidents, and because presidents have so much power, and I think there's a concentration of power in the presidency like we've never seen, particularly with the daily communication that comes out of the White House or from the president. So the question is, like right now, what's the big issue for the country and the government and the president right now, in your view?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yes.
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm honestly not sure. I don't think I have an answer for it. China, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else got any ideas?
The Ohio train derailment and Ukraine.
What happened in Ohio? Okay.
And
Ukraine.
How about the Ukraine war?
Yeah, he mentioned that.
Yeah, I think the Ukraine war is the most important thing going on right now. the decision, how to help, what to do, what the supplying of very high-tech equipment to Ukraine is a balancing act for Biden and his administration. How do you do that to help the Ukrainians win or stall the war without triggering an escalation on the part of Putin, who has publicly threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons? Should that happen, that would be a demarcation point in history that would change history after that. It's not just, oh, by the way, it's a tactical nuclear weapon, so it's smaller. You could take the world on an escalation ladder that would quite possibly obliterate all of us. It's that dangerous. And so go ahead.
Are you surprised that there hasn't been more reporting on the diplomatic track?
Look, it's hard to get the information as the war is going on. I think there's been Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has given lots of interviews and talked a great deal about it, but the definitive account of what happened the first year of that war is yet to be written. But I think it's hugely significant, and the diplomatic track, the imposition of economic sanctions on Russia, what weapons to supply, how to do it, how to deal with and denounce Putin. There are raging debates going on in the administration about the simple question, who is Putin? Is he just crazy? Is it rational for him to want to expand into Ukraine? There is a history there, used to be part of the Soviet Union. So lots of reporting to do, but I think there's major issue is climate change. I don't know much about that, but clearly it's significant. I think the third important issue is the coronavirus and variants. It has not gone away. If you read these stories, you will see that it could really become devastating again to this country and to the rest of the world. I think the fourth issue is, I'm sorry to get into the substance here, is inflation. I think it's still not under control, and I'm not sure they know what to do. And the fifth issue, and this is a tricky one, there is no clear political leadership in either party, the Republican Party, also the Democratic Party. And you see, even though Biden's president, he has astonishingly unfavorable ratings for all sorts of complicated reasons. Is he going to run? Biden has said, it is my intention to run. Dana, you're interviewing Biden on this question. I'll play Biden. What would you ask?
What would I ask?
Pardon?
How much of your energy level have you expended in your first term?
Other words, what's your energy level?
Right.
No, but I mean, ABC, good interviewer, David Muir, did an interview with Biden a couple of days ago. And Biden said, it is my intent to
Hmm.
run. Now, I'm sorry to be the class asshole. If I was doing that interview, I would say, Mr. President, aren't you being a little too cute and coy when you say it is your intention, but not saying whether you're going to do it? Does that mean you've decided? Does that mean you're undecided? That you have given a incomplete answer, one way or the other. Have you decided or not? And if your intention is, if you have an intent to do something, you've almost done it. I think he's getting away with an answer here that is unacceptable.
Yeah,
Dana, what do you think?
no, I think you could ask that question and he might answer you. I'm not sure if he would do that for anybody else.
No, it has nothing to do with, I mean, he's going to do what he is going to do, but you've got to ask the question. I saw this and I saw it's and Dave Muir saying, okay, it is my intent. Well, come on.
Yeah,
You know what it's fair to, I mean, it's a strange
yeah.
answer. It is a strange answer. When you asked me to come to talk to your class here, suppose I'd said, well, my intent is to come.
Exactly.
Say, well, are you going to? Can we schedule something? Can we? I mean, it's a preposterous answer. And sometimes the preposterousness of answers given in public is right there on the surface, and it should, in a way, not being demonstrating pomposity, ask that question very directly.
Can we get away with 2 more, Matthew? Got a couple more questions from the student. Matthew, go ahead.
So you were speaking earlier on not wanting to close doors with sources. I'm assuming that you have hit walls with people when it comes to confrontation. You've asked questions that make people feel uncomfortable. We've spoken about this already. You've published things that have made people call you and, you know, say mean things and blah, blah, blah. You know, how do you deal with that confrontation? How do you move forward from that? How do you maintain these sources and these relationships with people despite?
You keep doing it. If you look at the Trump tapes, one of the early interviews, I think December 5th, 2019, this is a year before, last year of his presidency, Trump said, oh, I'm, and he had his chief of staff, he had Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina there, some press people, Kellyanne Conway, and Trump said, gee, I wish I'd talked to you for your first book, Fear. And now Fear, according to all the reviews and the accounts, was a devastating portrait of Trump. Maggie Haberman wrote about it in the New York Times, saying it just, there's nothing like it because it shows stealing of documents, closing off debate, keeping Trump from being Trump. And during this interview, December 5th, Trump says, well, you know, and he turns to the other people in the room, said, I trust this guy, me. And we're going to do these interviews, and I wish I'd done it for Fear. And I'm sitting there, you can, because this is commentary I give in the, I was dumbfounded that Trump would say, oh, well, if I wish I'd talked to you for fear. Fear was the first of the books that really exposed the internal chaos in the Trump White House. It sold 2.4 million copies in hardback. I'd never sold any book on Watergate or anything else to that extent. And so Trump is decided now. Why did he decide to talk to me? Lindsey Graham told Trump, well, Woodward will do interviews, but he won't put words in your mouth. And Trump thinks reporters put words in his mouth. There may be some cases of that. I certainly would not put words in his mouth. And so Trump agreed to do it. I mean, this is a 9-month period. The agreement with him was I could call him anytime. I had a contact in the White House and who would switch me to Trump or leave a message. He could call me at any time. So during this 9 months, as Elsa, my wife, says, there were 3 people in the marriage, me, her, and Donald Trump. The phone would ring and we would look and think, is it one of our daughters? Is it a friend? Is it a robocall? Or is it Donald Trump? And it would often be Donald Trump. In the evening, just say, oh, I would, wanted to check in with you. And at one point, I remember he said, well, I can't talk long because I've got the Joint Chiefs waiting downstairs for me. And then he talked for 25 minutes, keeping the Chiefs waiting. Pardon?
Or the president of Mexico.
Or the president of Mexico. That's right. Well, I've got the president of Mexico waiting out here. I can't talk much, but then Trump never did not talk much. He talked a lot, and for me, it's the equivalent of the Nixon tapes. You see exactly what his answer is, what he did, how he performed his job. I asked him at one point, said, you're a child of white privilege. I'm a child of white privilege. My father was a judge and a lawyer and so forth. And so we need to understand the lives of Black people and how the experiences they have. And in the most simple way, kind of said, it's a matter for a journalist and a president to understand. You know what he says? Oh, Bob, you really drank the Kool-Aid. You really drank the Kool-Aid. As if somehow, anyway, read it in the book or listen to the audio.
Can we
the
get
idea-
our last questioner from one of our professors, Chris Hansen, who teaches military.
Yeah, I'm teaching a course in military media relations in wartime. And we've got a class, and that class is now in here as well. What are the main differences in difficulty in getting sensitive information on national security issues compared to domestic?
Obviously, national security many times or most time is classified, and but sometimes it can be really hard to get the inner discussions in an administration, Pentagon, the intelligence agencies about what's going on that may have to do with the economic issue. Now, one thing, if you'll bear with me here, I was looking through some material about how Nixon and Trump are so much alike. And to illustrate that, on December 14th, 1972, now Nixon has won a landslide re-election, won 49 states. Carl Bernstein had done our stories. They basically were not believed by most people. Oh, Nixon's too smart to conduct a campaign of espionage and sabotage against the Democrats. And we now know that's exactly what happened, chapter and verse. It was an effort to destroy the process of nominating and electing a president. So December 14th, he's won this election. He's feeling his oats, and his secret taping system captured this, and literally he's talking to Henry Kissinger, and he says, Nixon says, quote, "We're going to be around a long time. Our enemies are present. The press is the enemy. The professors are the enemy." Actually, Dana, so you're twice an enemy in this case. The professors are the enemy. The establishment is the enemy. The press, he said it again, the press is the enemy. And then he said, write that down on a blackboard 100 times and never forget it. Part of the Nixon personality and presidency, part of the Trump personality and Nixon is exactly that. These are enemies. This is a combat against the press and the professors and the establishment. I know some talk show hosts who were very upset they didn't make the list of enemies. But in Nixon's mind, and if you listen to this tape, it's said with this kind of, I'm on top of the world. Trump said it better once in these interviews when he said, everything is mine, everything is mine. That's the way Nixon and Trump operated.
Fascinating. Okay, well, we are switching classes now. Most students have to go to different classes, so I really wanted to thank you for your time and insight, and I look forward to having you back sometime.
Okay, thank you very much for letting me go on these issues, but it's I don't know. I mean, Dana knows this, and that is being a reporter. It's probably the best job in the United States. No one has a better job. And I often theorize if someone came from Mars and lived in the United States for a year, then went back to Mars, and they asked, who has the best jobs in America? The answer would be the reporters, the journalists. Why? Because, and this is so critical, we get to make momentary entries into people's lives when they're interesting, and we get to get the hell out when they see they get to not be interesting. I have, Dana, I'm sure this happens to you, old sources from decades ago will call and say, I've really got something for you, and you listen, and most of the times they don't. but you listen.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, thank you so much, and really, we have a lot to look forward to in this next generation of journalists. I know you know that from your own teaching, but I really feel that way. And thank you for helping them.
Thank you. Best of
Okay.
luck. You're very kind to invite me.
So just click that little red button.